The sun was hanging high in the sky, baking the pavement of the expensive parking lot. It was the kind of hot day that made the air shimmer above the ground. Standing right in front of the grand entrance was a woman named Eleanor. She didn't look like she belonged there, and she knew it. The resort was a massive building made of glass and white stone, looking more like a castle than a hotel. The name Azure Haven was written in fancy gold letters near the top. Cars were pulling up constantly, but not the kind of cars Eleanor was used to seeing. These were long, shiny vehicles that cost more than a house. Eleanor clutched her small, cloth purse tight against her chest. Inside that purse was something very special to her. It wasn't money or credit cards. It was a small velvet pouch containing a little bit of ash. It was all she had left of her husband, Arthur. He had passed away 2 years ago. Before he got sick, Arthur used to bring Eleanor to this very spot. Back then, it wasn't a fancy resort for millionaires. It was just a quiet, beautiful garden by the sea where they would sit on an old wooden bench, eat cheap sandwiches, and watch the water. Arthur had promised her that one day, when he was gone, she should take him back there. He said it was the only place where his soul felt truly light. Eleanor took a deep breath and smoothed down the front of her dress. It was a simple dress with a pattern of small sunflowers on it. She had bought it at a department store sale years ago. It was clean and neat, but next to the sparkling dresses and tailored suits of the people walking into the hotel, she felt like a ghost. She wore comfortable leather sandals that were a bit scuffed from walking. She looked at the entrance. The glass doors were sliding open and closed constantly, letting out a blast of cold air conditioning that smelled like expensive flowers and lemon polish. She started walking toward the revolving door. Her heart was beating a little faster than usual. She wasn't there to spend money. She wasn't there to cause trouble. She just wanted to find the garden. She wanted to find that old bench and sit there for 10 minutes. That was it. She thought it would be simple. She thought they would understand. As she got closer to the entrance, a young man standing near the door looked at her. His name was Julian, but Eleanor didn't know that. He was wearing a suit that looked like it cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent. His hair was gelled perfectly, and he held a clipboard like it was a weapon. He watched Eleanor approach. At first, he smiled, thinking she was a guest. But as she got closer, his eyes scanned her clothes. He saw the worn sandals. He saw the simple fabric of her dress. He saw that she wasn't wearing any jewelry. His smile vanished. It was replaced by a look of polite but cold dismissal. Eleanor stepped into the cool lobby. It was breathtaking. There was a huge chandelier hanging from the ceiling that sparkled like thousands of diamonds. The floor was made of white marble that was so shiny you could see your reflection in it. In the middle of the room, there was a fountain with gold fish swimming in it. Eleanor stopped for a second, feeling overwhelmed. It was so different from the quiet garden she remembered. It felt loud, flashy, and cold. She walked up to the long, curved front desk. Julian stepped in front of her before she could get too close. He didn't let her reach the counter. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Julian said. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were looking past her, checking for the next real guest. "Can I help you?" Eleanor cleared her throat. She felt her cheeks getting a little warm. "Yes, hello," she said softly. "I was wondering if I could just walk through to the gardens. I don't need a table or anything. I just want to visit the South Garden for a few minutes." Julian raised an eyebrow. He looked down at his clipboard. "The gardens are strictly for registered guests and members, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" "Oh, no, I don't," Eleanor said quickly. She opened her purse just a little bit, touching the velvet pouch inside for comfort. "I don't need a room. My husband and I, well, we used to come here a long time ago. Before this was all this." She waved her hand vaguely at the fancy lobby. "We had a bench. It was near the back wall. I just wanted to sit there for a moment. It's very important to me." Julian let out a short, bored sigh. He had heard 100 excuses from people trying to sneak in to use the bathrooms or steal the free Wi-Fi. "Ma'am, this is a private resort. We have very strict policies. If you aren't staying here or eating here, you can't be on the property." "It would only take 10 minutes, Eleanor pleaded. She tried to make him see her eyes, hoping he would see a human being and not just a nuisance. "I'm an old woman. I just want to remember him." "I'm sorry," Julian said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. He sounded annoyed that she was wasting his time. "If you want to see the gardens, you can book a table for afternoon tea. It starts at $200 per person." Eleanor's eyes widened. $200? For a cup of tea? She shook her head slowly. "I don't have that kind of money. I just want to sit on a bench, and I'm afraid there is nothing I can do," Julian said. He straightened his jacket, signaling that the conversation was over. "Please, you need to leave. You are blocking the entrance for other guests." Eleanor stood there for a moment, feeling small. She looked around the lobby. There were people sitting on velvet sofas, laughing and drinking from tall glasses. She wondered if any of them had ever loved someone as much as she loved Arthur. She wondered why they got to sit in the beauty and she had to stand in the heat. She felt a lump forming in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She didn't want to cry in front of this boy with the perfect suit. "I understand," Eleanor said quietly. She took a step back. "I didn't mean to intrude." She turned around and started to walk away, but she didn't head for the exit yet. She moved to the side, near a large window, looking out at the area where the garden used to be. She could see the tops of the palm trees through the glass. She was so close. It felt wrong to leave without keeping her promise. Julian watched her. He whispered something into a small headset on his collar. He wasn't going to let her linger. He didn't want her kind messing up the atmosphere of his lobby. A moment later, a tall man in a security uniform walked over. He had a stern face, and his arms crossed over his chest. He looked like a wall that had grown legs. "Is there a problem here?" The security guard asked, looking at Eleanor like she was a piece of trash that had blown in. "This lady was just leaving," Julian said loudly, making sure Eleanor could hear him. "She was trying to access the private gardens without a pass." Eleanor turned back to face them. "I was just looking," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I was going." "I think it's best if you go now, ma'am," the security guard said. He took a step closer, invading her personal space, trying to intimidate her. "Don't make me ask you again." Eleanor looked at the guard, then at Julian, and then at the beautiful, cold lobby. She felt a spark of anger in her chest. It wasn't fair. She wasn't asking for much. But she knew she couldn't win. They had the power, the suits, and the authority. She only had her memories and a pouch of ash. "Okay," Eleanor whispered. "I'm going." She walked toward the glass doors, her head held high, trying to keep her dignity. But as she pushed through the heavy doors and stepped back out into the blinding heat, she felt a tear escape her eye and roll down her cheek. She wiped it away roughly. She didn't know that this wasn't the end of it. She didn't know that her simple request was about to shake the very foundation of this expensive place. She just stood on the hot pavement, feeling like the whole world had forgotten her. The heat outside was intense, a sharp contrast to the icy air conditioning of the lobby Eleanor had just left. She stood on the curb, the sun beating down on her shoulders, feeling a bit dazed. She wasn't ready to walk to the bus stop just yet. She looked back at the resort, shielding her eyes with her hand. Through the tall glass, she could see the tops of the palm trees swaying in the breeze inside the garden area. She knew that if she could just get past those hedges, she would find the old stone bench. It had to be there. They wouldn't have moved a bench just because they put up a fancy hotel, would they? Eleanor took a deep breath of the hot air and made a decision. She wasn't going to cause a scene, and she wasn't going to shout. She just wanted to walk around the side of the building. There was a low hedge and a pathway that led toward the beach. If she could slip through that way, maybe she could find the garden gate without going through the main lobby again. It wasn't about breaking the law. It was about keeping a promise to a dead man. She tightened her grip on her purse and started walking. Along the paved path that ran parallel to the building, she walked slowly, her sandals making a soft clicking sound on the stone. She tried to look like she belonged, staring straight ahead, pretending she was just a guest taking a stroll. She passed a couple sitting by the pool who didn't even look up at her. She thought maybe she was invisible. She thought she might actually make it, but she wasn't invisible. Inside the lobby, the young man at the front desk had been watching her. He saw her pause on the curb and then start walking along the perimeter. He frowned. He picked up his phone and dialed the security office. He didn't like people who didn't follow the rules. If they let one person walk around the outside, soon the whole place would be full of non-paying guests trying to catch a glimpse of the luxury life. Within a minute, a tall security guard was back. He had been resting in the shade near the parking valet stand, but now he marched down the path with heavy steps. He saw Eleanor up ahead, moving slowly toward the garden gate. He picked up his pace. "Hey," he shouted. "Ma'am, stop right there." Eleanor froze. Her heart jumped into her throat. She didn't turn around immediately. She hoped, for just a second, that he was talking to someone else. But there was no one else on the path. It was just her. "Ma'am, I said stop," the guard repeated, much closer now. Eleanor turned around slowly. The guard was looming over her, blocking the path back to the front. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, and his face was red from the heat. He didn't look happy. "I was just looking for the beach," Eleanor stammered. She didn't want to tell him about the ashes yet. She knew how it sounded to people who didn't understand. They didn't see love. They saw a hassle. "The beach is for guests only," the guard barked. He pointed a thick finger toward the street. "You were told to leave the property. That means the whole property, not just the lobby. You are trespassing now." "Trespassing?" Eleanor asked, her voice weak. "But I'm on a public path. This is private property," the guard said sternly. "The sign says so. I need you to leave right now, or I will have to remove you." "I don't understand," Eleanor said, tears starting to prick at her eyes again. "My husband and I, we loved this place. We came here for 30 years. I just want to say goodbye. I have something of his here." She reached into her purse. She didn't pull out a weapon or anything dangerous. She pulled out the small, worn photograph of Arthur she kept tucked inside her wallet. It was black and white, taken when they were young and full of hope. She held it out to the guard, thinking maybe, just maybe, if he saw Arthur's face, he would understand. "Look," she whispered. "This is Arthur. He passed away. He just wanted to rest here one last time." The guard didn't even look at the photo. He didn't care about Arthur. He didn't care about 30 years of history. All he saw was an old woman holding up a piece of paper and stopping him from doing his job. "I don't want to see your photos," he snapped, swatting the air dismissively as if he were shooing away a fly. "I don't care who you are or who he was. You are not a guest. You do not have money to stay here. That means you don't belong here." The words stung Eleanor like a slap across the face. "You don't belong here." She looked down at her sandals, then at the photo in her hand. She felt a deep, aching sadness in her chest, but mixed with it now was a hot flash of indignation. Who was this man to tell her where she belonged? Arthur had worked hard his whole life. He was a good man. "Please," Eleanor said one last time, her voice trembling. "Just let me go to the bench. I will leave right after. I promise." Guard lost his patience. He grabbed Eleanor by the upper arm. His grip was firm and rough, hurting her frail skin. "I gave you a chance to leave on your own," he growled. "Now you're coming with me?" He started to pull her back toward the front entrance, not through the lobby this time, but around the side where the dumpsters and delivery trucks were. It was a walk of shame. Eleanor stumbled as he pulled her. She tried to keep up, but he was walking too fast. "You're hurting me," she cried out. "Then walk faster," the guard said over his shoulder. "I don't have time for games today." As they came around the corner of the building, they were back in full view of the main entrance. The valet drivers were parking cars. A small group of tourists was standing outside, taking pictures of the fancy car in the driveway. And through the glass, the staff in the lobby could see everything. The receptionist with the clipboard was standing at the window, watching with a smirk on his face. He was enjoying this. It made him feel powerful to see someone being dragged away. A few guests inside had turned their heads to watch the show, sipping their expensive drinks, whispering to each other. Eleanor felt her face burn with humiliation. She was being treated like a criminal, like a thief caught stealing. She had never been in trouble with the law in her entire life. She had paid her taxes, she had volunteered at the library, she had been a good neighbor, and now, here she was, being manhandled by a bully in a uniform. Just because she wanted to sit on a bench, the guard marched her right to the edge of the property. Near the busy street where the cars were zooming past, he didn't stop at the sidewalk. He pushed her out onto the gravel shoulder. "Get out," he said, giving her one final shove that made her lose her balance. Eleanor stumbled and fell to her knees on the dusty ground. Her dress got stained by the dirt and her palms scraped against a sharp rock. A small drop of blood welled up. She gasped in pain, more from the shock than the injury. The guard stood over her, looming like a giant. "Don't come back," he warned. "If we see your face here again, we will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Do you understand me?" Eleanor looked up at him from the ground. Her vision was blurry with tears. She didn't say a word. She just nodded slowly. She was terrified. She didn't want to go to jail. She just wanted to go home. She picked herself up slowly, brushing the dirt off her knees. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely fix her dress. She felt eyes on her from every direction. The valets were laughing. The guests in the lobby were staring with curiosity or indifference. She felt small. She felt worthless. She turned away from the resort and began to walk along the busy road. There was no sidewalk here, just a narrow patch of grass near the road. Cars sped by, splashing a bit of water from a puddle onto her legs. She didn't even react. She just walked. She was clutching her purse so hard her knuckles were white. The ashes of her husband were still there, safe in the velvet pouch, but now it felt heavier. It felt like a burden. She had failed him. She couldn't even give him his final wish. She felt like a fool for thinking she could walk into a world of money and fancy suits and be treated with respect. The resort grew smaller behind her as she walked further away. The sound of the fountain and the luxury cars faded into the noise of the traffic. Eleanor was alone again. Just a simple woman with a broken heart and a dirty dress walking nowhere. She didn't know where she would go now. She couldn't go back there. She just kept walking, one painful step at a time, wishing the ground would just open up and swallow her whole. The walk away from the resort felt longer than the walk there. Eleanor's legs felt heavy, like lead weights were attached to her ankles. Every step was a struggle. The road was busy, with loud cars rushing past her, their tires humming on the asphalt. She kept her head down, staring at her worn sandals as they moved over the uneven ground. She didn't want to look up. She didn't want to see the grand building getting smaller in the distance, reminding her of her failure. She found a small, low wall made of brick a little way down the street. It was near a bus stop, but it was in the shade of a large old tree. Eleanor sat down slowly. Her knees were shaking so much, she wasn't sure she could stand much longer. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue. She wiped her face, which was wet with tears and sweat. She felt sticky and uncomfortable. Eleanor looked at her hand. There was a small scrape on her palm where she had fallen. It was starting to sting a little, and a tiny bit of dried blood was there. She stared at it, not really feeling the pain. The pain in her heart was much worse. She felt a deep sense of shame. She hadn't done anything wrong, yet she had been thrown out like a common criminal. The guard's voice kept echoing in her head. "You don't belong here." She reached into her purse again and pulled out the small photograph of Arthur she had tried to show the guard. The corner was slightly crumpled now. She used her thumb to smooth it out gently. "I'm so sorry, Arthur," she whispered to the picture. Her voice was shaky. "I tried. I really did. But it's too different now. It's not our place anymore." She sat there for a long time, just watching the traffic and feeling the cool breeze under the tree. She was waiting for her heart to stop racing. She was waiting for the humiliation to fade away. But it didn't fade. It just sat in her stomach like a heavy stone. While she sat there, trying to find the strength to stand up and go to the bus stop, the activity at the resort continued. Inside the fancy glass lobby, the atmosphere was light and cheerful. The staff moved around like bees in a hive, polishing glass, adjusting flowers. And bowing to the guests, the young man at the front desk. The one who had sneered at Eleanor was feeling very good about himself. He stepped out from behind the counter to chat with a woman standing near the door. She was wearing a bright red dress and holding a tiny dog. "Did you see that?" the receptionist asked, pointing toward the road where Eleanor had disappeared. He had a smug smile on his face. There was this older woman trying to get in. She looked completely lost. Probably confused or something. The woman with the dog laughed. Oh no. Was she causing a scene? She tried to get to the gardens, the receptionist said, puffing out his chest a little. I told her she couldn't. Then our security officer had to escort her off the property. People like that just don't understand boundaries. They think they can go wherever they want. Well, good for you, the woman said, patting his arm. We pay a lot of money to stay here. We don't want to be bothered by, well, just random people. Back at the desk, the receptionist's friend, another staff member who was arranging flowers nearby, leaned over. He looked amused too. I saw her from the window, the flower arranger said. She had that big purse. Probably trying to sneak in and steal food or something. The receptionist laughed. Exactly. You can't be too careful these days. It's better to be strict. Keeps the place classy. They had no idea who Eleanor was. They didn't know about the velvet pouch in her bag. They didn't know about the 50 years of love she carried with her. To them, she was just a funny story to tell, to pass the time. They felt superior. They felt powerful because they wore fancy uniforms and worked behind a polished desk. They looked down on her because she looked simple. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood up. She felt a little bit stronger, but she was still incredibly sad. She decided she would wait for the bus on the other side of the street. She didn't want to look at the resort anymore. It made her heart ache to see how beautiful it was, and to know she wasn't welcome. She waited for a break in the traffic and then walked slowly across the road. She was in the middle of the crosswalk when a luxury car zoomed past her, not stopping for the pedestrian, honking its horn loudly. Eleanor jumped, startled, and almost dropped her purse. Hey, watch it. The driver yelled through the window, though he was the one speeding. Eleanor didn't yell back. She just hurried to the sidewalk. She felt like the whole world was against her today. It was as if the universe was telling her that she didn't matter, that she was invisible. She reached the bus stop and sat on the metal bench. It was hot from the sun. She took a sip of water from a bottle she had in her bag. The water was warm, but it helped. She looked at her watch. The next bus wasn't due for 20 minutes. She looked back across the street at the resort. The gates were open. A long black car was just pulling in. It looked expensive. Eleanor watched it for a moment. She wondered who was inside. She wondered if they were happy. She wondered if they had ever lost someone they loved more than life itself. She remembered the day Arthur died. It was quiet in the hospital room. He had held her hand and told her to be brave. He told her to live her life. But living without him was so hard. Every time she saw something beautiful, she wanted to share it with him. The bench at the resort was their spot. It was where they felt safe. Without that physical connection, she felt like she was losing him all over again. I failed you, she whispered again. A tear rolled down her cheek and landed on her dress. The staff at the resort were still watching the road. From the lobby windows, the security guard was standing near the valet stand, looking bored. He glanced across the street and saw the little old woman sitting at the bus stop. He pointed her out to the valet drivers, making a joke about her waiting to escape. They all laughed. They thought she was gone. They thought the problem was solved. They felt safe in their bubble of money and arrogance. They had no idea that their actions had set something in motion. They didn't know that the woman they mocked was connected to their world in a way they couldn't imagine. Eleanor sat on the hot bench feeling small and defeated. She just wanted the day to be over. She wanted to go back to her small apartment, put on her comfortable robe, and cry. She felt like she had been fighting a giant and lost without even throwing a punch. She closed her eyes and let out a long, sad sigh, hoping the bus would come soon to take her away from this place that had turned into a nightmare. The heat at the bus stop was getting worse. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, but the air was still thick and heavy. Eleanor sat on the hard metal bench, her eyes closed, trying to shut out the world. She was tired. Not just physically tired from the heat and the walking, but deep down, tired in her soul. She felt drained, like all the energy had been sucked out of her. She just wanted to disappear. Across the street, the resort was still buzzing with activity. The shiny glass doors kept sliding open and shut. People were coming and going, laughing and talking. It felt like a different planet. Eleanor watched them through the blur of her tears, feeling like a ghost on the wrong side of a wall she couldn't climb. She reached into her purse one last time. She didn't take out the photo this time. She took out the small velvet pouch. She untied the little string and peeked inside. It was just gray dust. To anyone else, it looked like dirt. But to Eleanor, it was Arthur. It was his laugh, his kindness, and his love. She had wanted to pour him into the soil of their favorite garden, letting him rest among the flowers they used to admire. Now, she felt like she was carrying a burden she couldn't set down. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she whispered again. We'll just go home." She was just about to stand up and check if the bus was coming when a sound cut through the noise of the traffic. It wasn't the loud roar of a sports car or the honk of a taxi. It was a low, deep rumble. It sounded like thunder, but it was a clear, sunny day. It was the sound of a powerful engine. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked down the road. A large, black car was turning onto the street that led to the resort. It moved with incredible grace, gliding over the bumps in the road as if they weren't even there. It was a Rolls-Royce. It was long and sleek, painted in a deep, glossy black that shone like a mirror in the sun. The silver trim on the sides sparkled. It was the kind of car you usually only see in movies or magazines. The car drove past the bus stop, just a few feet away from Eleanor. It was so big that it seemed to block out the sun for a moment. She watched it roll by, admiring how smooth it looked. It slowed down as it approached the grand entrance of the resort. Suddenly, the atmosphere on the street changed. The valet drivers, who had been lounging against the wall and joking around, snapped to attention. They fixed their jackets and stood up straight, looking nervous. The security guard, who had been leaning on his post-looking board, stood up straight and pulled his shirt down, trying to look professional. Inside the lobby, the staff noticed the car too. The receptionist with the clipboard stopped talking to the lady with the dog. He looked out the window with wide eyes. The flower arranger stopped fluffing the petals. Everyone knew that a car like that meant someone very important was arriving. It wasn't just a rich tourist. It was someone who owned the world. Eleanor watched the car too, but she wasn't impressed by the money. She was just watching it move. It was beautiful in a way. It reminded her of a boat sailing on a calm lake. She didn't know who was inside. She hoped they were having a better day than she was. The Rolls-Royce pulled right up to the front curb, blocking the view of the entrance. It stopped perfectly in the center of the red carpet. For a moment, everything was quiet. The engine purred softly, like a sleeping cat. Nobody moved. The valet driver scrambled toward the car, eager to open the door. He wanted to make sure the guest felt like a king. He reached for the polished door handle. But before he could touch it, the driver of the car, a man in a crisp uniform and a cap, jumped out from the front seat. The driver rushed to the back door of the car, gently waving the valet away. It was clear that the driver wanted to handle this himself. This wasn't just any passenger. This was someone special. Eleanor watched from across the street. She saw the driver bow his head slightly and place his hand on the handle. She saw the security guard step forward, putting on his most serious, respectful face. She saw the receptionist watching from the window, holding his breath. Must be a movie star, Eleanor thought to herself. She didn't really care. She just wanted the bus to come so she could leave. The back door of the Rolls-Royce opened slowly. It swung outward in a smooth, silent motion. A polished black shoe stepped out onto the red carpet. It was followed by the rest of a man. He was older, perhaps in his 70s, but he stood tall and straight. He had silver hair and was wearing a dark, tailored suit that looked incredibly expensive. He didn't look like a tourist. He looked like he owned the ground he walked on. The man paused for a second, standing next to the car. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at the resort entrance, then at the staff standing there waiting for him. He didn't smile. He had a serious, thoughtful expression on his face. The security guard stepped forward to greet him. "Good afternoon, sir," the guard said, his voice booming with fake respect. "Welcome to Azure Haven." The man in the suit didn't look at the guard. He didn't look at the valet. He didn't even look at the beautiful resort building. Instead, he turned his head. He looked across the street. His eyes swept over the busy road. They passed the shop windows and the trees. And then they locked onto the bus stop. They locked onto Eleanor. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine, even though it was hot. She looked away, thinking he was just staring at the empty bench or the bus sign. She felt embarrassed again. She knew what she must look like to a man in a Rolls-Royce, just a messy, poor old woman sitting in the dirt. But the man didn't look away. He squinted slightly, focusing on her face. He tilted his head to the side. He seemed to recognize something. He seemed to be trying to solve a puzzle. The guard, noticing the man was looking at the street, turned his head too. He saw Eleanor sitting there. "Ah, don't worry about that, sir," the guard said loudly, trying to be helpful. "That's just a local lady. We had to ask her to leave earlier. She was causing a disturbance. We are handling it." The receptionist inside the lobby nodded to himself, agreeing with the guard. He was glad the security guard was explaining it so well. He wouldn't want the VIP to think they let just anyone hang around. The man in the suit turned to the security guard. He looked at him with a cold, hard stare that made the guard take a step back. "You asked her to leave?" the man asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. It cut through the air like a knife. "Yes, sir," the guard said, sweating a little now. "She didn't have a reservation. She was trespassing. We kept the property safe for you." The man looked back at Eleanor. He saw her dirty dress. He saw her scraped hand. He saw the way she was holding her purse tight, trying to make herself small. He saw the sadness in her shoulders. Suddenly a look of shock crossed the man's face. His eyes went wide. It was as if a lightning bolt had struck him. He dropped his hands to his sides. "Eleanor," he whispered. He didn't say it loudly. The valet drivers didn't hear him. The receptionist didn't hear him. The wind almost carried it away. But he said it. The man didn't wait for the doorman. He didn't wait for the red carpet to be rolled out fully. He stepped off the curb. He ignored the guard's confused look. He started walking across the street, right toward the bus stop, right toward Eleanor. Eleanor saw him coming. She stiffened. She thought he was coming to yell at her too. Maybe he was the manager? Maybe he was going to tell her to move along because she was an eyesore? She gripped her purse tighter and prepared to stand up and run, even though her legs were too tired to run anywhere. But as the man got closer, he didn't look angry. He looked urgent. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He walked right through a gap in the traffic, holding up a hand to stop a taxi that was honking at him. He didn't care about the cars. He only cared about getting to the other side. He reached the bus stop. He stood in front of Eleanor, blocking the sun. She looked up at him, trembling. "Was this—" "I'm going," Eleanor stammered. "The bus is coming. Please don't shout." The man knelt down on one knee right there on the dirty sidewalk. He didn't care about the dust getting on his expensive suit. He brought his face down to her level so he could look her in the eye. "Eleanor," he said again, his voice full of disbelief and warmth. "Is that you?" Eleanor looked at his face. Really looked at it. Past the silver hair and the expensive suit. She looked at his eyes. They were kind eyes. They were eyes she had seen before, a long time ago. Her mouth fell open slightly. The sadness in her chest paused for a second. "Arthur," she whispered, even though she knew it couldn't be Arthur. Arthur was gone. But this man reminded her so much of him. The man smiled, a genuine soft smile. "No, Eleanor," he said gently. "Arthur is my father. My name is William," Eleanor gasped. She felt like the world had stopped spinning. "William." He reached out and gently took her hand. The hand that had been grabbed and shoved earlier. He held it like it was made of glass. "I got your message," William said. I was in a meeting across town. They said someone was looking for me. They said an old lady was here. I never thought. I never dreamed it would be you." He looked at the scrape on her palm. His face darkened with anger, but he kept his voice soft for her. "Did they do this to you?" he asked, looking at her injury and then back at the resort. Eleanor felt a tear roll down her cheek. But for the first time that day, it wasn't a tear of shame. It was a tear of relief. "I just wanted to see the garden," she whispered. "I wanted to sit with him." William stood up slowly, helping her stand up with him. He turned around, and the entire street fell silent. He was still holding her hand. He looked back at the resort. He looked at the staff who were watching from the lobby, their smiles gone now, replaced with confusion and fear. "They didn't know who you were," William said, his voice getting louder, carrying across the street. "But I do." He turned back to Eleanor. "You aren't taking the bus, Eleanor. You're coming with me. My father loved you more than anything. You are the most important guest this place has ever seen." William didn't wait for Eleanor to argue. He gently tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, holding it securely, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He turned her away from the bus stop and faced the luxury hotel across the street. Eleanor felt her legs shaking, but William's strong arm gave her the support she needed to move. She wasn't just an old woman in a faded dress anymore. She was walking with a king. They stepped off the curb and into the road. The traffic, which had been honking and rushing just moments before, seemed to melt away. A taxi driver who had been revving his engine saw William's face and the look in his eyes, and he immediately slammed on his brakes. He waved for them to go, his angry expression turning into one of curiosity. Eleanor felt like she was walking in a dream as they reached the other side. The atmosphere at the resort entrance had completely changed. The valet drivers were standing frozen, their mouths hanging open. They looked from William to Eleanor and back again, unable to process what they were seeing. The security guard, the one who had dragged Eleanor away just 10 minutes ago, had turned pale as a sheet. He looked like he might be sick. The receptionist with the clipboard was pressed against the glass inside the lobby, his eyes wide with panic. He knew William. Of course he did. Everyone knew William. He was the owner. He was the man who signed the paychecks. And here he was, crossing the street with the very woman the receptionist had mocked and thrown out. "Open the door," William said to the valet driver. He didn't shout, but his voice was hard and cold. The valet scrambled to comply, nearly tripping over his own feet to get the heavy glass door open. William guided Eleanor into the cool lobby. The air conditioning hit her face, but this time she didn't shiver. She held her head high. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the marble floor. The lobby was quiet now. The guests had stopped talking. The music seemed to have been turned down. Everyone was watching. The security guard stepped into their path, but he didn't look brave anymore. He looked terrified. "I can explain," the guard stammered. She was trespassing. She didn't have a reservation. "I was just doing my job." William stopped. He turned to look at the guard. He looked him up and down, taking in the uniform and the badge. Then he looked at Eleanor's scraped hand and her dusty dress. "Your job?" William asked quietly. "Your job is to protect this hotel, yes? But it is also to protect the dignity of the people my father cared about. You put your hands on a lady? You dragged her. You humiliated her." The guard swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his forehead. "I didn't know who she was, sir, who she is." William's voice rose, echoing off the walls. "It shouldn't matter who she is. You treat everyone with respect. But even if you only care about important people, you failed spectacularly." "This woman," he said, gesturing to Eleanor as the widow of Arthur Vance. "Do you know that name?" The guard looked confused. He shook his head slowly. William took a deep breath. "Arthur Vance was the man who saved this business. 40 years ago, when this place was just a struggling inn, he lent me the money to keep the doors open. He never asked for it back. He worked in the garden for free just to keep the flowers alive. He and this woman built the foundation that this fancy hotel stands on. She owns more of this place in her heart than you ever will in your bank account. The lobby was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The receptionist near the desk looked down at the floor, wishing he could disappear. The guests were whispering to each other, staring at Eleanor with new eyes. They weren't looking at a poor old woman anymore. They were looking at a legend. William didn't wait for the guard to respond. He turned Eleanor toward the elevators. "Come on, Eleanor," he said softly, his anger vanishing as he spoke to her. "Let's get you cleaned up, and then we will go to the garden." They rode the elevator up to the top floor. Eleanor had never been in an elevator that moved so smoothly. When the doors opened, it wasn't a room. It was a private apartment overlooking the ocean. It was beautiful, filled with soft furniture and fresh flowers. A kind woman, in a uniform, appeared immediately. William must have called her on the way up. She helped Eleanor clean the scrape on her hand and brought her a glass of cool water. For the next hour, Eleanor and William sat and talked. He showed her old photographs of Arthur she had never seen. He told her stories about how Arthur used to brag about her cooking and her kindness. Eleanor cried, but this time they were happy tears. She felt close to Arthur again. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, William stood up. "Are you ready?" he asked. Eleanor nodded. They took the private elevator down to the garden level. When they stepped out, it was quiet and peaceful. The air smelled like jasmine and ocean salt. William led her down a winding stone path, past perfectly trimmed hedges, till they came to a quiet corner in the back. There, shielded by a large willow tree, was an old wooden bench. It wasn't fancy like the new furniture around the pool. It was weathered and worn, but it was polished and clean. On a small plaque attached to the armrest, it read, *Arthur's spot. Eleanor gasped. "You kept it. You promised we would never move it," William said. Eleanor walked over to the bench and sat down. She ran her hand over the wood. She remembered sitting here with Arthur, holding his hand while the sun went down. It felt exactly the same. William stood back, giving her space. He stood like a guard, making sure no one disturbed her. From her purse, Eleanor took the small velvet pouch. She untied the string and gently poured the contents into her hand. She held the ashes up for a moment, whispering a final goodbye. Then she leaned down and sprinkled them gently into the soil beneath the willow tree, right where Arthur's feet used to rest. "Rest now, my love," she whispered. "You're home." The breeze picked up, carrying the dust into the garden. It felt like a hug. Eleanor sat there for a long time. She didn't feel sad anymore. She felt light. She felt that she had finally kept her promise. Back in the lobby, things were changing. The security guard and the receptionist were called into the manager's office. They didn't come out with their jobs. William didn't tolerate people who treated others like dirt. He made sure that everyone working at the resort knew that the most expensive clothes didn't make you important, and the oldest clothes didn't make you worthless. Eventually, Eleanor stood up. She smoothed down her dress and turned to William. "Thank you," she said simply. "It is my honor," William replied, bowing his head slightly. "You can come here any time, Eleanor. The gate is always open for you." William walked her back to the front entrance, but this time the Rolls-Royce was waiting right at the door. The driver held the door open for her. As Eleanor stepped into the cool leather seat, she looked out the window one last time. She saw the guests, the lights, and the beauty, but she didn't feel small anymore. She knew the truth. She knew that love was the only real luxury in the world. As the big black car pulled away from the curb and drove into the night, Eleanor leaned back and closed her eyes. She was at peace. She had said goodbye to her husband. She had found an old friend. And she had taught a very expensive lesson to a very expensive hotel. It was a good day,